A warm welcome from the Learning and Development Directorate, and welcome to Legislative Overview, a module within our Orientation to the Public Service series. The module aims to provide public officers with an overview of the legislation which governs them. In this module, we will identify the laws which govern public officers and state how these laws affect public officers. Some of this information you may already know, but this is to provide clarity on, for example, where to find the information and all the pertinent conditions associated with the information this section is being presented. We will start our discussion today with having a look at the laws which govern the public service. The public service is governed by laws, regulations, rules, and administrative directives, for example, guidelines for study leave, or the circular on overtime, or study leave for short periods. Whether enacted by an Act of Parliament, that is, a law or directive issued by Ministry of the Public Service, for example, both laws and administrative directives must be adhered to. Public officers can be called to account and disciplined on the contravention of any of the laws or regulations. While there are several pieces of legislation which govern the operations of ministries, departments, and agencies within the public service, we will be focusing on these pieces of legislation. The Barbados Independence Order. Public Service Act Cap 29, which includes the General Orders for the Public Service 1970 and the Civil Establishment Act Cap 21. Civil Establishment Qualification Orders 2016. Financial Management and Audit Act 2007, Financial Management and Audit Financial Rules 2011, and the Safety and Health at Work Act Cap 356. The first piece of legislation we will look at is the Barbados Constitution. The Barbados Independence Order 1966 is normally referred to simply as the Barbados Constitution. In 2021, a bill altered the Constitution to provide for Barbados to become a republic with a president who shall be head of state. It is the supreme law of Barbados. Any law or section of a law that conflicts with it is null and void. The importance of the Constitution to you, as public officers, is that it gives recognition to the public service in Chapter 8 through the establishment of the service commissions, and it defines the terms public officer and public office. Currently, there are 3 services commissions, and the Constitution gives power to the Public Service Commission to advise the President to appoint, remove, or discipline any public officer. Section 94(1). There was an amendment in 2020 to change the nomenclature of the Public Service Commission to the Administrative, General, and Professional Services Commission. The other commissions are the Judicial and Legal Services Commission and the Protective Services Commission. The Public Service Act, Cap 29, consolidated such legislation as the Civil Establishment Act Cap 21 and the Training Act into one document or law. Purpose of Act: to revise and consolidate the law relating to the administration of the public service, to achieve greater efficiency and effectiveness in the management of that service. It is applicable to appointed and temporary employees. Within the Act there are various codes, namely, the Recruitment and Employment Code, which gives guidance and outlines procedures by which persons should be recruited to the service. The Code of Conduct and Ethics, which codifies the standards of conduct expected of all public officers. The Code of Discipline, which states the penalties for breaches of these standards, and the Code on Grievance Handling, which outlines the procedure for handling grievances. Note: in Section 3 of the first schedule, the Recruitment and Employment Code states that selection of an officer for a position is first based on merit. However, depending on the nature of the work, consideration will be given to seniority. This is referenced in the Public Service Act by saying, every individual to be appointed to an office in the public service shall be selected on merit, but where the nature of the work so requires, consideration shall be given to seniority and experience. The method of selection shall be governed by objectivity, impartiality, and transparency. In the second schedule, Code of Conduct and Ethics, hours of work are specified by the minister and may vary for different categories of workers. Generally, normal working hours are 8:15 to 4:30, Mondays to Fridays, inclusive of 1 hour lunch. When we make mention of the minister, we are referring to the minister with responsibility for the particular portfolio, so in this case, the minister with responsibility for the public service. It should be noted that habitual lateness is a breach of the Act. According to Section 14, subsection 3, each ministry or department is required to keep a register of attendance, and officers are expected to record their arrival and departure times. This code also applies to public officers who are governed by the Police Act, the Prisons Act, and the Fire Service Act, where no specific provision under those acts or under statutory instruments made under those acts applies in relation to the misconduct specified in this code. This code is aimed at ensuring that standards of conduct laid down in this Act, in any statutory instruments made thereunder, or in the Code of Conduct and Ethics are observed. The purpose of the code is to ensure that the principles that guide the disciplinary process should have procedural fairness, determine each case on its merits, indicate the factors to be taken into account, and outline the powers and responsibilities of the investigating officer. Grievance Handling Code gives guidance on the process for handling grievances within the public service. The Civil Establishment Act Cap 21, which dealt with the establishment of posts, has now been repealed, and that the provisions for establishing offices in the service are now in the Public Service Act, Section 13. Under the Public Service Act, the minister has power to establish offices and determine the number of persons who could be appointed to offices. The Civil Establishment Qualification Orders of 2016 lists the necessary qualifications for each post. Qualifications listed are applicable to both established and temporary posts and temporary officers, unless stated otherwise when the temporary post is approved. Civil Establishment Qualifications Orders are used to verify the qualification requirements for each post, to verify that officers being recommended are suitably qualified, and to respond to queries from officers concerning qualification requirements. In some instances, alternative qualifications may be issued by the Ministry of the Public Service for some temporary posts. Such memoranda should be retained for reference. Recourse can be made to the Ministry of the Public Service if there is a dispute with respect to an alternative qualification. If an officer has a qualification which they believe is an alternative to or the same as the qualifications required, then they can have the Ministry of the Public Service have their qualification examined for relevancy and suitability. The General Orders for the Public Service of Barbados 1970 has now been subsumed into the Public Service Act Cap 29 in Section 33 of Public Service Act. If there is a conflict, the Public Service Act prevails. The information contained within the General Orders is still very much valid. The General Orders can be used to provide the rules and regulations governing salaries and allowances, and research the rules and regulations governing the grant of leave such as vacation, sick, duty, half-pay, special, and extensions of leave. Most other segments are now included in the Public Service Act. Research information on the Public Officers Loan and Traveling Allowances Act, POLTA. Some officers, namely traveling officers, those who are required to visit various sites in the execution of their duties, may apply for a loan to purchase a vehicle. The officer must be the substantive holder of the position. The categories of traveling officers are spelt out in the first schedule to the POLTA Act. Salaries and wages. Salaries and wages according to the General Orders are approved by Parliament. Officers are entitled to increments on the anniversary of their appointment to a position. Further increments are paid each year until the officer reaches their maximum salary. Temporary officers can be granted increments according to Section 4.4.2, provided that their work is satisfactory. This only applies to officers in scalar positions. We will briefly explain salary scales and what each category represents. There are three categories: S, P, and Z. S is a fixed salary scale, S1 to S9. P refers to police officers, prison officers, and fire officers, and Z refers to officers in a scalar position. This is the one you fall into, Z38 to Z1. We now want to turn to examining aspects of government finances. The Constitution sets up the framework for government spending, and then the Financial Management and Audit Act 2007 and the Financial Management and Audit, Financial, Rules, 2011, fleshes out the law. The Constitution as the supreme law speaks to what government can spend money on. Section 107 states, "There shall be in and for Barbados a consolidated fund, to which, subject to the provisions of any law for the time being in force in Barbados, shall be credited all revenues of Barbados. All statutory expenditure is charged to the consolidated fund." Section 109 states, "The minister responsible for finance shall, in respect of each financial year, at the earliest convenient moment before the commencement of that financial year, introduce in the House of Assembly an appropriation bill containing, under appropriate heads for the several services required, the estimated aggregate sums which are proposed to be expended, otherwise than by way of statutory expenditure, during that financial year." Public service ministries and departments cannot spend money that Parliament has not approved. We will now briefly discuss the Financial Management and Audit Act 2007 and the Financial Management and Audit Financial Rules 2011. Although you may not work in an accounting stream or directly with finances, it is still important for you to have a clear overview of how the public service works and for you to be aware of these pieces of legislation. Government cannot spend money without Parliament's approval. But where do you think government gets the money from in the first instance? According to Section 2 of the Financial Management and Audit Act 2007, government collects revenue from various sources, namely levies, taxes, rates, duties, fees, penalties, forfeitures, rent due, proceeds from sales, and all other amounts earned by the state. All revenue is credited to the Consolidated Fund. Section 3 of the Act. The Act identifies key persons and offices, namely the Director of Finance, Accountant General, and Auditor General, that govern or manages government's finances. The Director of Finance is responsible for setting policy, the Accountant General who reports on public service spending, and the Auditor General who audits or checks on how government funds are actually spent. The Auditor General, although a public officer, does not report to a minister but reports to Parliament. Finally, the Act spells out the role of the accounting officer, who is the permanent secretary, who is responsible for the collection of revenue and spending of funds. A critical section in the rules that apply to you as a public officer is Section 180. It reads, 1. Where the state advances monies of the state to an officer, the officer shall repay the monies in such periods as specified in the 7th Schedule. 2. Where a person receives advances of monies from the state, and the person makes a claim in respect of a salary or pension that he receives from the state, the Accountant General or an accounting officer of a relevant department shall ensure that deductions are made from the salary or pension, as the case may be, in respect of the advances of monies. In effect, what this section says is that if an officer receives overdrawn salary, for example, then she or he must repay it. The repayment period and amounts are specified in the 7th Schedule. Overdrawn salaries must be repaid. If you owe any monies to the government, for example whether it is overdrawn salary or other, on retirement, it will be deducted from their pension or gratuity before they are paid. The Safety and Health at Work Act 2005, also referred to as the Shaw Act, came into force in 2013. It applies to all workplaces except the police service, Barbados Defense Force, domestic service in private households, and any department the minister exempts. The minister in this case refers to the minister with responsibility for the agency which enforces the Shaw Act. Some of the duties of the Act from the employer's perspective are to ensure that workplace ergonomic standards are met, provide a safe working environment, provide adequate welfare facilities, and cater to employees with special needs, for example, a ramp. Employees also have specified duties under the Act. These are to take reasonable care of their own safety and others, and, for female employees, to inform employer of pregnancy in writing. As public officers, you're encouraged to familiarize yourself with the legislation presented here as well as the legislation which is specific to the operations of your ministry, department, or agency. If you have any questions, please reach out to the Learning and Development Directorate via telephone at 535-6700 or via email at our registry email address. If you're accessing this content as part of an online learning program, contact your course coordinator or course facilitator if you have any course-related or technical challenges, for example, broken links or pages that would not open, etc. If you're experiencing any challenges, please email us.